Emily Dawson was just 17 when her life turned into a waking nightmare, and her father, Mark Dawson, made a choice that would change everything forever. What began as a teenage romance spiraled into obsession, fear, and a deadly confrontation that left one man dead and a quiet town reeling. Emily Dawson's life looked like something out of a feel-good movie. She was 17, well-liked by her classmates, and known for her bright smile and love of photography. She spent most weekends walking the trails near her home, snapping pictures of birds and sunsets. Her room was filled with photo prints, hanging on strings held up by clothespins. Her father, Mark Dawson, had always encouraged her creativity. A local firefighter with a quiet presence and a strong moral code, Mark had raised Emily on his own since her mother passed away when Emily was just 9. Their bond was tight, almost unbreakable. It was the summer before senior year when Jason Riley entered Emily's life. He wasn't from their small Oregon town. He had moved in with a relative after dropping out of a college program in Portland. Jason was 20, with shaggy hair, a lazy grin, and a casual charm that drew people in. Emily met him during a summer photography class offered by a local art center. He noticed her camera, complimented her shots, and before long, they were talking after every session. He offered to help edit her photos, even walked her home a few times. It started as a friendship, or at least that's what Emily thought. Jason was attentive, almost too much. He started showing up at her usual coffee spots, tagging along with her friend group and texting her from multiple numbers when she didn't reply. At first, Emily brushed it off as flattery. He seemed like he just liked her more than she liked him, and she didn't want to be rude. But when he started sending her photos she didn't remember taking, photos of her walking home alone or sitting in the park, it felt different. Something in her gut told her this wasn't normal. She tried to distance herself. She told him she wanted space, that she wasn't ready for a relationship, but Jason didn't listen. He continued texting, waiting outside her house, and once even left a scrapbook filled with her own photos on her porch. Her name, Emily Grace Dawson, was written in large black letters on the inside cover, surrounded by hearts and strange, poetic messages. When Emily finally told her father, Mark's face hardened. He listened quietly, his eyes scanning her face as she spoke, and then stood up without a word. That night, he installed new locks and a motion-activated light near her bedroom window. He filed a police report, and days later, they received a temporary restraining order. Jason was served with the papers, and for a little while, he disappeared, but the tension remained. Emily returned to school that fall, trying to resume her routine. She smiled in the hallways, attended club meetings, and posted her usual nature photos online. But she kept looking over her shoulder. Her father began, driving her to school every day, watching the streets carefully. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both knew. This wasn't over. Something was building, and it wouldn't be long before everything changed. Jason Riley had never truly disappeared. After the restraining order was served, he vanished from view, but not from Emily's life. His presence lingered like a shadow, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore. Strange things began to happen. Emily would find footprints beneath her bedroom window, fresh even after it hadn't rained. Her phone lit up with calls from unknown numbers at odd hours. Packages arrived without return addresses, mostly old photographs of Emily from public school events, each one marked with a black X over anyone standing beside her. Mark became more vigilant. He added more cameras around the property and adjusted his work schedule to be home more often. Emily was no longer allowed to walk anywhere alone. Even a short trip to the convenience store had to be accompanied. It made her feel trapped, like her own life was being pulled further and further out of her hands. She hated the fear that came. With every knock at the door and the paranoia that clung to her during the night, her friends began noticing a shift in her. She smiled less. Her phone was always on silent. She stopped sharing her photos online. The world that once brought her joy now felt like a trap waiting to snap shut. Police involvement didn't help much. Since Jason wasn't violating the restraining order in any provable way, there was little they could do. He hadn't contacted Emily directly in weeks, but the signs were everywhere. Her school locker had been broken into twice. A classmate mentioned seeing a man loitering near the school parking lot who fit Jason's description. One evening, her childhood cat went missing. 2 days later, it was found near their fence, alive but clearly frightened, its collar replaced with a small tag that read, "I see you." Mark began to change too. He was a man used to solving problems head-on, running into danger to pull others out. But this threat was different. It was quiet, creeping, and intangible. He couldn't extinguish it like a fire or chase it away like smoke. Each night, he sat in the living room with the lights off, staring out the front window, a loaded revolver on the table beside him. Emily hated seeing him like that, haunted and silent, but she understood. The danger wasn't imagined. It was real, and it was getting closer. Then came the break-in. Emily came home from school one afternoon to find her bedroom window ajar. Her laptop was gone, along with her backup hard drive full of photographs. Nothing else was touched. No money, no jewelry, just the devices with her life's work stored inside. On her desk, someone had carved the words, "We're not finished." The police came, took fingerprints, and left with promises to increase patrols. That night, Mark didn't sleep. He sat beside Emily's bedroom door with the revolver resting in his lap, listening to every creak of the house. He knew what the message meant. Jason wasn't done, not by a long shot, and Mark was no longer willing to wait for someone else to save his daughter. After the break-in, the Dawson house changed. It no longer felt like a home. It felt like a fortress under siege. Emily couldn't sleep without a light on. Mark barely slept at all. Every small sound in the night sent them both into high alert. Emily stopped going to school for a while. Her assignments were sent home, and she stayed behind locked doors, jumping at shadows and keeping her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Mark began documenting everything. He wrote down times, dates, and descriptions of suspicious activity, built a file of every incident linked to Jason, and compiled a list of witnesses who had seen him around. It was a quiet obsession, and Emily watched as her father, once so calm and composed, turned into someone almost unrecognizable, paranoid, driven, and exhausted. He kept calling the police, demanding more action, but there was always the same response. Unless there's a direct threat, we can't do more. Then, on a cold night in late October, the security cameras captured something that finally pushed Mark over the edge. Around 2 a.m., Jason was seen creeping into their backyard, crouching near the window to Emily's room. He stayed there for 15 minutes, watching, then disappeared into the trees. The footage was grainy but clear enough to identify him. Emily had been asleep at the time, unaware of how close he had come. Mark took the footage to the police, but again, nothing could be done. Jason hadn't entered the house or made contact. It wasn't enough. That same day, Mark went to a nearby shooting range to practice. It wasn't just for comfort anymore. It was preparation. Days passed with no sign of Jason. Halloween came and went in a strange silence. The Dawson house stayed dark that night. No candy, no visitors. Just Mark and Emily inside, locked down like a bunker. Then came a false sense of calm. For nearly 2 weeks, nothing happened. No sightings, no gifts, no calls. Emily began to relax, just slightly. She returned to school part-time. Mark even went back to work for short shifts, though he never strayed far from his phone. That illusion shattered one Friday afternoon when Emily was walking to her friend Rachel's house, just 3 blocks away. Despite Mark's objections, she insisted on going alone. She needed to feel normal again, if only for an hour. She didn't make it to Rachel's. Emily arrived back home in a panic. Jason had followed her. She noticed him in the reflection of a storefront window. He didn't approach her, just watched from across the street. He wore a black hoodie, hands in his pockets, expression blank. She turned around, heart pounding, and ran all the way home. By the time Mark raced out to the street, Jason was gone again. That was the final crack. Mark didn't speak for the rest of the day. That night, he cleaned his revolver slowly, methodically, and placed it in his truck. He wasn't going to wait anymore. If Jason came near his daughter again, there would be no more warnings, no more police reports. There would only be action. Winter came early that year, cloaking the town in thick grey skies and brittle air. Emily's birthday was approaching, but there was no talk of celebration. Her smile had faded, and her shoulders always seemed tense, like she was carrying a weight no one else could see. Mark barely left the house unless it was absolutely necessary. His truck was parked on the street now, engine always ready, and inside was the revolver, fully loaded, tucked neatly in the glove compartment beneath a folded flannel. Emily tried to act normal, returning to her photography when she could, snapping bleak winter landscapes from her window. But nothing felt safe. Jason hadn't been seen in over a week, yet his absence was as frightening as his presence. Silence, in his case, meant planning, and Mark knew it. He felt it deep in his gut. Then, on December 14th, a message came through on Emily's phone from an unknown number. It was short. One more chance. No image, no threat. Just those 3 words. She froze when she saw it and showed it to her father without speaking. Mark stared at the screen, jaw clenched. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. That evening, Emily received an invitation to a small Christmas party hosted by her classmate, Claire. She hadn't planned to go, but Mark insisted on driving her there. He didn't like the idea of her being out at night, especially now. But he also knew she needed some sense of normalcy, anything to distract her from the fear she carried. They left around 6:30 p.m., the sky already dark, streets lined with soft snow. Emily was quiet during the drive, twisting the sleeves of her sweater between her fingers. When they arrived, something felt wrong. The house was dark, no cars in the driveway, no music, no lights. Mark pulled up slowly and scanned the area. Emily checked the address again. It was correct. She stepped out of the truck hesitantly, phone in hand, just as Mark noticed footprints in the snow leading around the side of the house. Too fresh to be old, too singular to be from a party. Then Jason appeared. He stepped out from behind the porch, dressed in black, holding something in his hand that glinted in the truck's headlights. Mark reacted instantly, shoving Emily back into the passenger seat and slamming the door shut. Jason charged toward them, face blank, eyes wild. Mark met him halfway, catching him near the front of the vehicle. A brief, brutal struggle unfolded. Jason swinging the knife, Mark trying to disarm him. The blade cut across Mark's arm, but he managed to grab Jason by the collar and slam him onto the frozen ground. The revolver was still in the truck. There was no time to get it. Jason lunged again, knife raised, but Mark overpowered him. Using his strength and training, he twisted. The blade free then, without pause, turned it back on him. The snow was quiet when it ended. Jason lay motionless in the pale light, his breath gone. Emily watched through the window, hands shaking, unable to move. The police arrived minutes later. Mark stood silently beside the body, bleeding, his coat soaked in snow and something darker. He didn't speak. He didn't run. He just waited. The town of Brookpine woke up to sirens and whispers the next morning. Word spread fast. Jason Riley was dead, killed by Emily Dawson's father in what many were quick to call an act of self-defense. For some, it felt like justice served. For others, it raised questions too dark to ignore. The scene had been cleared, but the traces lingered. Blood on the snow, a shattered knife, a father with haunted eyes. Mark was taken into custody for questioning, but released shortly after. According to initial reports, he had protected his daughter from an armed assailant. There were bruises and cuts on both men, confirming a physical altercation. Jason's fingerprints were on the knife. Surveillance footage from a nearby house captured parts of the attack, blurry but enough to support Mark's account. Emily backed it up completely. She said Jason had appeared suddenly, weapon in hand, and that her father had saved her life. But then the deeper investigation began. Jason's phone was recovered at the scene, its battery nearly dead. Inside were hundreds of saved texts, unsent, voice memos, and photos, some deeply disturbing, others strange in a different way. There were recordings of Jason talking to himself, crying, rambling about forgiveness, about being misunderstood. A few voice memos suggested that he believed Emily was sending him secret messages online, despite her blocking him on every platform. He mentioned dreams, signs, and cryptic references to their future together. It painted a picture of someone unwell, someone delusional and spiraling. But one memo stood out. In it, Jason described a confrontation with Mark that had happened just days before. He claimed Mark had threatened him directly, telling him to disappear or face consequences. That meeting had never been reported, and then came the neighbor's video. Grainy footage showing Mark and Jason arguing in a parking lot near a gas station. Jason held his hands up while Mark moved toward him, aggressive, pointing, then shoving him backward. It lasted only seconds, but it raised eyebrows. Prosecutors reviewed the case with caution. If it was self-defense, it had to be clean. But Mark's silent determination, his loaded gun left in the truck, and the earlier confrontation created a murky picture. Was it truly an ambush? Or had Mark anticipated it and been ready to end it for good? In the end, the case never went to trial. The district attorney declined to press charges, citing insufficient evidence for premeditation and the overwhelming support for Mark's claim of defense. Public opinion leaned heavily in his favor. A grieving, protective father defending his daughter from a dangerous stalker. A tragedy, yes, but an understandable one. Still, Emily left town within weeks of Jason's death. She stopped answering texts, deleted all her social media, and withdrew from school. Mark sold the house and moved without a forwarding address. In Brookpine, people still talk about the girl who was followed, about the father who stepped in, about how sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom, but from a man who couldn't wait any longer.